This is an Audio Wool original.
Last time, we had talked a little bit about your exploration of the canyons and when you and Alexandra were fired on. And then we kind of wrapped it up talking about the helicopter, the Huey, then just kind of helicopters generally. So we're hoping to give you a chance to wrap up any of those thoughts that you wanted and then move on in kind of whatever direction. This is just all so fascinating to me. Like any direction that you go is great with me. We're just here to listen and nod my head.
Right on. Yeah, that particular incident really was kind of a turning point for us as to the validity of the danger that other people had spoken of, including Tom Dongo. And Tom was one of the ones that warned us. There are certain areas that are too dangerous, certain areas where he wouldn't go. And in fact, there's another area which he spoke of, which apparently has an entrance to one of the facilities that was brought to him by a fellow investigator whom I have not met. And that investigator was insisting that he go to it. And finally, the investigator came back and said, you know what, I'm not going up there again. They just told me they'll shoot me if I go up there. So don't go up there. And Tom said, I'll take your word for it, because he knew this individual very well, and decided to take discretion and not go up there. So he was very, very explicit with Alexander and myself about certain areas that are do and do not go. But as it turns out, if you've looked at the satellite imagery of the canyons, the Sedona area in general, particularly the canyons, Secret Mountain more or less sits in the center. And out from that, the canyons are kind of like spokes on a wheel. And so the Secret Mountain itself is like the hub. And then the canyons come out like spokes from a wheel from it. And every single one of those canyons has had witnesses, many of whom we've met, and Tom has met well over a dozen, very legitimate, more than that, but the dozen witnesses he speaks of are ones that he can really validate their claims, that they're very trustworthy people in their accounts. But there's been many, many people that have gone into all the canyons at night and had similar encounters where they would run into people that were dressed like soldiers, and in some cases pointed firearms in their direction and said, you need to turn around, go back the way you came, because this area is closed government property, which of course is not true.
No,
that area there.
Were there any?
It's U.S.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was there ever any name tape, badges, organization? Nothing.
Good question. No. In every single one of those circumstances, the people that encounter them, who get a good look at them, made a note that there's no tactical insignia, no badges on the left or right shoulder, not even rank tabs of any sort, and no name tape at all. So it leads me to believe it's probably PMCs, paramilitary contractors hired by the aerospace and defense companies that are working out there. From all intents and purposes, they tend to try to hire, if they're getting good ones that are former military. And so they'll carry themselves as military. Their bearing is usually rather military. Their appearance is very military, but in fact, they're civilian contractors.
It sounded like, to speak to that, in one, I don't remember if this was on News Nation when you and Alexandra were on there. You had related witnessing one of these individuals who, if I remember correctly, had a very, very much unmilitary bearing and equipment loadout.
Yeah, in that particular circumstance, we were at the site that's adjacent to the portal site, which we've nicknamed Purple Haze, and there's an abandoned ranch there. And of course, we had to go over fences to get to it. So it is private property. And when we were in there, we had gone right after a monsoon thunderstorm, and there was still a lot of electrical activity in the air. So we thought, ideally, it was a good time to go in there because nobody would be out looking. And in fact, we were wrong. We had climbed a cliff, and this man had tracked us in. And he looked very military as well. And just recapping, because I know I told you this story already, but As he walked toward us, and I had binoculars, and I was looking from the cliff top where we were, approximately 80 feet above, we could see that he was wearing a chicken plate. He had body armor up front under his shirt. He had a handgun and a waist holster right in the front under the plate, but he was partially dressed as U.S. Forest Service. So, and U.S. Forest Service does not wear body armor in Arizona, and I doubt that they wear them in any other state either. And he was very aggressive when he was tracking us. He seemed almost irritated that he couldn't figure out where we had gone. He knew we were there. He just couldn't figure out where we had gone. And he even went up to the structure, which again, it's an abandoned ranch that's got locked doors. And he was body slamming it. So how many times do U.S. Forest Service employees go up to structures on any property and body slam it and try to get in? And so that particular individual also was a scare for us, because when he left, he had a white truck, which U.S. Forest Service does use, except the ones that the U.S. Forest Service here in Yavapai and Coconino counties use have the U.S. Forest Service logo on the door. This truck had no logo on the door. It had a government prefix on the plate, which I was able to read through my binoculars, which I later looked at in the database for government motor pool. And it was specifically from a motor pool that said unspecified agency. So that proved that it was clearly not being used by U.S. Forest Service. It was for an unspecified agency. So, it's anyone's best guess as to exactly what agency that was. But he had run our plate. He took photographs of our plate. And then I don't know if I hope I told you when I was recapping this or telling you the story the first time, but he actually walked up to our driver's side door and he tried the door handle. Again, that's not something that not even most law enforcement would try, but this particular individual, partially uniformed and really disheveled looking, he actually had one pant leg tucked in and partially in his sock by accident. So wherever he sprung up from, he was getting dressed in a hurry. And we have a photograph of him. We photographed him from the cliff top as he was walking away. So I can send that to you if you wanted to put that in the broadcast so you could show the viewers what this man looked like.
Yeah, we'd love to.
He was not. Well, I'll send that to you. In fact, I think some of the other things I was telling you about, I do have photographs as well. And I'll send those along to you as well, so you have those to put up with the podcast.
Yeah, we would love those for the show notes. And I especially, the one where you have this gentleman's face, I would love anything to get rid of the veil of secrecy around these people. I think would be, any little bit we can do for that would be fantastic.
This has been more or less the goal since News Nation had actually announced that they were coming. And Ross Coulthart, by the way, and his crew are incredibly kind and incredibly driven people. And the investigation is still ongoing now. And so they're keeping up very well with the team here, not just myself, but the other team members on anything recent that's come up. And there's been a lot since I want to say that was the week prior to Contact in the Desert when I met you, that they aired I think it's 7 or 8 Arizona episodes. In fact, the last one with my friend Tom Dongo aired, I think, the Thursday that we arrived at Contact in the Desert. So it was a hot topic, I think, literally upon arrival there, because it was literally the last episode was airing as people were arriving at the event. But what was really curious to me, because Alexander and I, in our investigation in the past 13 years, well, it'll be 13 years in August, we kept most of it to ourselves. We were quiet about it. We would share with Tom Dongo over a lunch on occasion, and it's a wonderful visit. Sharing things with Tom Dongo he's an absolute treasure. He's a very kind man, and he appreciates what other investigators bring to him. And there's no, what's the way to put it? There's no ego. There's no, he's not one of those people that says, well, I'm the world's foremost expert on this or that. He's had people call him an expert, but he's the first one to say, no, I'm not an expert. I've simply been around a long time and been looking and observing a long time. In the case of sharing things with him over 10 years, we stayed pretty much to ourselves with the stuff that we were investigating until he got very ill. And that was in 2022, I think it was. And he had been contacted by the History Channel, and they wanted him to accompany them on an investigation for Beyond Skinwalker to the Bradshaw Ranch. And he said, I can't do it. I'm very ill right now. My doctor doesn't want me out there in 18 degrees or even below zero temperatures, which it will surely be. It was a really cold December when they came. They were here for 3 weeks, and I think we were at least in the lower teens every night when they were here. And so he said, would you and Alexander be willing to take this for me? And I said, well, we'd rather kind of stay in the dark, stay in the black on this investigation. He said, I understand that, but it would be a great personal favor to me because I'm not feeling well. So I said, if that's the way you put it, it's a personal favor. Sure, we'll go ahead and do this. And when they came, they more or less, I guess, really opened up the can of interest in the underground base rumors, which really up to this point had been a lot of rumors, hearsay, and anecdotal evidence. And of course, a lot of anecdotal evidence with people that were going into the different canyons and running into these people with firearms and no name tags or patches on their uniforms, both at night and during the day. But the majority of the accounts would happen at night. And so when they came, they of course they kind of split their investigation into two parts. The first part and primary part was for the anomalous activity, which they now call high strangeness, on the property, and they brought technology with them that they'd never used before, stuff I had never heard of. So they had a camera that would, for instance, read gamma rays, and it was a brilliant little thing. And ironically, it's made by Teledyne, and Teledyne is one of the companies that's actually hiding underground out here northwest of Sedona. And the reason I say that is the very first whistleblower we met, who had worked security with his own private military contractor company, was hired and sent out here to the Sycamore Basin, where he was taken underground. And he was with two other paramilitary contractor company heads. They all did their pitch, and then they were all flown out. And he was contacted shortly after to say that he had been hired, his company had been hired to do the job. And I said, well, that's incredible. What year was that? He said, that was 1987. I said, so wait a second. So that underground facility has been out there since 1987. They went, no, it's a lot older than that. He goes, what I saw was much older. He goes, I don't know how long it's been there, but it's been there a lot longer than even when I was hired to work there. And I said, well, how long were you there? He said, just briefly. He said, my company was replaced after a while. They got another company that did it with would offer more in protection. I said, what exactly did you do? He said, simple security. We deployed security inside the facility and mostly above ground at night when they were testing. And I was in shock. I said, hang on. So testing, what exactly were they testing? And he said, well, what you were already talking about. There's reverse engineered craft, and they were taking this craft up and testing it. And when they did so, we would deploy ground security blocking the launch areas. So he said trails, ATV trails, hiking paths. He said there weren't many because the area they're launching from is extremely rural and extremely rugged. But he said that's what we did. We would deploy. We rarely had to block somebody, but when we did, we told them that this is a government operation, government property. They need to turn around and go the other way. And again, I'm virtually jumping up and down at that point because that's verbatim what the witnesses that we had talked to that had the same occurrence happen, and more or less what we ourselves had encountered at one of the two sites. The second site is the site that we ended our first podcast on, which they just shot at us. There was no warning whatsoever. But it really opened up that can of worms for us when Beyond Skinwalker came, because the second part of their investigation was to bring a company called Terra out, and they did their ground penetrating radar. And of course, they uncovered a man-made tunnel that was running a straight line, 50 feet in diameter, uniform the entire way, across a football field area, which is now directly under Bob Bradshaw's old movie set. Now, the movie set's gone. I probably told you about that. When the government took the property, one of the first things they did was to burn it down to the ground. And there's a hearsay anecdote. I couldn't get any confirmation on it. But apparently after, or I should say right before the Bradshaws lost the property, Bob made a contract with Jeep Wrangler. Again, this is hearsay. I haven't been able to find proof on this, but it sounds to me to be a plausible one. And Jeep Wrangler was to come and do a commercial at his movie set. And the backdrop from his movie set looking into the canyons and the north is just gorgeous. It's what you'd hope to see in a classic movie set, like the John Wayne movies that were directed by John Ford. They shot some of them in Sedona, not the same location, but just gorgeous backdrop. And right after the contract was signed, they had, I guess, X number of months to go before the production would actually arrive in Sedona at the Bradshaw Ranch to shoot the scenes. Well, the property was swept out from under the Bradshaws. They had to sign their non-disclosure agreement and stick to the agreed reasoning, which was the taxes on the property, which isn't the complete truth, according to John. And he had to call them and say, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to exit the contract. I no longer own the property or the ranch, the film lot. And the people at Jeep said, well, that's really too bad, because we really were set on using the set. We really like the set. Is there any way that we could still do this? And he said, no, I don't own the property by the time that your shooting date comes up. So I'm afraid I'll have to exit the contract. I have my apologies. I've never had to do this before. And again, they were persistent. They said, well, Bob, we'd really like to carry on and do this. Is there any way we could do this? And Bob, being an old gentleman, he said, I'm going to give you a telephone number, and the telephone number is going to call a office in Washington. You can ask them. They're going to say no. And they're like, no, we'd be grateful if you would give us that chance. So he gave them the phone number. An office in Washington, D.C. picked up the phone. They explained that they were from Jeep Wrangler, the producer, and they wanted to shoot this TV commercial. They arranged to do it with Bob. And the person on the other line said, no, can't do it. And the Jeep, surprisingly, was still persistent. They said, we'd really like to do this. What do we have to do to be able to do this? We'll pay you more to use the site. We really want to do this. And finally, I guess the official on the other side of the line said, could you do it in one day? And they were like, well, yeah, I guess we could do it in one day if we set up more units. And they said, and what's your storyline for the commercial? And they said, it's real simple. There'll be a bar fight, and the dams will be in stress with chairs flying everywhere and guns going off, and the fight will spill out to the street, and she'll be ducking for cover. And then the cowboy rides up to save her, but he won't ride up on a white steed. He'll ride up in a white Jeep Wrangler, and then he'll take her off into the sunset. And the person on the other side of the line said, well, okay, what if you scrap that and the whole town is on fire and she's being saved from the fire? And apparently the person from Jeep Wrangler said, well, that's not exactly what we had planned. And they said, what if that's the only choice you had? And they said, okay, I guess we'll do it then. So supposedly, and again, it's hearsay, I heard this from someone who was here during the time and knew the Bradshaw as well. It's a reputable source, but again, I can't get confirmation on it, that they came to shoot, and they had set up something like 7 units, 7 cameras, and they were given one go. They set the whole place on fire, and they had to shoot this guy picking her up, riding her off, bringing her back, dropping her off, going back the way it came, picking her up again. So they just did it a bunch of times while this whole place burned. Got the shot, and then the federal representative was there. Was like, okay, you got the shot, now get out of here. And that was it. That was the last thing supposedly that was shot on Bob Bradshaw's film set, which he called Bitter Creek. He built it in 1972, and a number of TV shows and features have been shot on it. And a lot of actually anomalous activity happened there too. But while they used to have for a while, to supplement income there with the tourists in town, horseback rides. And the horseback rides would start right there in the old West Town. And they converted one of the buildings. It wasn't like the 2-dimensional facade that you see built in Hollywood. These were all actual 3-dimensional buildings. The saloon you could actually walk into through the classic, old West doors that flip in, and you'd see the mirror going around, and the balcony where the ladies of the night would stand. It was a beautiful set. In fact, when I saw it, because I got to go over to the ranch for a small picture that was being shot, I remember there being cobwebs coming down from the ceiling, and I had to move them with my hand. I remember smelling the old wood because it had been there since 1972. It was really cool. And I had just moved here, so I didn't know exactly what I was seeing. And when I got outside, I said, this is really incredible. What exactly is this place? And one of the people that was part of the production turned and said, this is the Bradshaw Ranch. That was the first time I'd ever heard of the Bradshaw Ranch. And it wouldn't be until several years later that I would read the book Merging Dimensions and realize that I had actually been at the Bradshaw Ranch and had no idea I'd even been there. But the gift shop that they made in one of the buildings was on the front left of the road. It's just as you would go in past the ranch. And they had their credit card machine and their cash register, and they had a large 1-gallon container of what were they? They were Fireballs. So the hard candy, the Fireballs, and this thing is full, right? So, and it's also sealed. So it's a sealed jar top with a big white lid. And at night when they would leave, they would padlock it. And of course they would take the key back to the house. Well, one morning, Tom Doggo got a call. It was Linda, and Linda said, Tom, you've got to come over here right away. There's something you need to see. And he told us whenever I got a call from Linda saying that, I knew I had to get over there right away. So he jumped in his van, throws his camera in the van and his other investigative material, goes speeding off and gets to the ranch, and she's waiting for him. And so she beckons to him, follow me, follow me. So they walk over to the old movie set, and they get to the padlock on the door. And she said, you see this? She said, this is the way it was when I got here this morning, locked. And she tugged on it. She goes, go ahead, tug on that. So he gave it a couple of tugs. It was locked. And she said, now walk around and tell me if there's any other way in. And there was no windows. It was a wooden shack, more or less, with one door and a padlock. And Tom said, nope, there's no way in there. Well, what is it? She said, I'll show you. So she unlocked it, swiveled the padlock open, took it off, and opens the door. And when they get inside, the jar is now on the floor, and the lid has been taken off and not broken off, mind you, like a raccoon might manage to break it or chew it open. There's no chew marks on the jar at all. And then right beside the jar are all the wrappers. Something had gone into the shack that night without the key, without breaking the wooden panels on the side, had opened the jar. So it had, naturally it had to have opposing finger and thumb to do so, and ate all the fireballs. And so Tom is just dumbstruck. He goes, I really don't know what did this. Is there any way that a rodent could have gotten here, a skunk or a raccoon? And she said, no, we went through all that already. There's nothing that could have gotten in this. And she also pointed out, look at that, something opened the jar. And so they deduced that the Bigfoot creature, which she had already dubbed as being interdimensional because they had seen it do some incredible things, had decided to dematerialize, walk through the wall, go inside, and eat the hard candy. And she had already made the discovery that it has a sweet tooth because she originally, when she started feeding it, she thought, well, what are these things eat in the wild? Let me think. Probably mushrooms and things that they would find out in the forest. So she naturally gets this plate and sets vegetables and fruit and things that she thinks that this thing might eat. And it didn't touch it. And it wasn't until after many days of trying the fresh vegetables that she did something sweet. I think it was grapes. It did eat the grapes and left the other vegetables. So it was like a child.
Sounds like my kids.
Just didn't want to touch it. And so then she tried sweets, and the sweets vanished, and the plate was overturned. And then she was getting communication from it. It was leaving sticks in forms in the sand where she was feeding it. And I think she described one of the formations as being like a triangle, the sticks. So she in turn started making her own symbols back to see if she could get it to communicate. And she didn't really go into detail in what she wrote about it, but this creature was communicating in a relatively intelligent fashion with them at the place that they were feeding it. But she did establish that it did like to eat sweet food.
That is a great story, and it does sound just like my kids. I love that. That's just a fun story about some of the mischievous things that happened there.
Yeah.
So I got to go back. I want to go back to the Teledyne connection. That gamma meter that they had on the show. We paused the show right there when it was on. We got the History Channel, whatever their app is, just to watch Beyond Skinwalker. We paused it because we had to know more. Like I had to know more about that camera. I had to know mostly if I could get one, and I was shocked, to say the least, when I saw how much that unit cost. And just that fact alone ends an air of gravitas towards that whole procedure. If they're using equipment that's that grade, that caliber, that was really impressive.
Yeah.
And so that's wild that Teledyne is right there. I actually have a Google Earth open right here, centered on Secret Mountain on my other screen. So were you able through your secondhand contact to learn where the Teledyne base was located?
I have a relative idea of where they're at. Now, when we met the whistleblower, he just matter-of-factly thumbed over his shoulder in the direction of Sycamore Canyon. Sycamore Canyon is huge. It runs roughly 27 miles from, if you're looking at your map and you look at the Clarkdale area and you just kind of drag your finger to the north of it, you'll see a massive chasm of sorts, kind of like a Grand Canyon, going almost due southwest to northeast. And that's Sycamore Canyon. And it's basically anywhere that when you're in Sedona and you're looking to the northwest, you're going to cross over Sycamore Canyon if you were flying as a crow flies due northwest. It's massive. Now at the center, you'll see the rough center of it is a mountain called Black Mountain and a mountain called Kazner Mountain. In between those is a place called Sycamore Gap. And Sycamore Gap is probably about a mile wide, not quite that. And that particular area there is also a hot zone for these encounters with the paramilitary types. So starting there and then going into Sycamore Canyon is where a lot of these facilities are. We know for sure there's an entrance there because one of our very, very good witnesses was actually shot at down there. I think I did tell you about that. He was the one that was riding his motorbike.
Yeah.
If I didn't, I'll repeat the story. But his story. Go ahead. You were going to.
No, I don't think we heard that one, Jeremiah.
I'll tell you that one. That one of our best witnesses. We were actually in a relatively public place. I was talking to one of the fellow investigators, who's a Vietnam veteran and just a very serious investigator and very skeptical, which is a good thing. And we were having a conversation out loud, and we noticed that there was a young fellow that was not too far away that was listening to us. And the Vietnam veteran kind of nudged us and said, "You've got an eavesdropper over there." And I turned and looked. I said, "Yeah, that's fine. If he thinks we're crazy, then so be it. We've got to talk before you have to go, right?" He says, "Yeah, I gotta get going." So we finished our conversation. He turns around and walks away. We're about to walk away, but the young man approaches us and says, excuse me. I'm so sorry. I was eavesdropping." I turned. I was kind of sarcastic. I said, "Yeah, I could see that." He said, "Well, I'm sorry. I couldn't help but hear what you were saying. And I want you to know I don't think that you're crazy." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I don't think you're crazy. You were talking about an underground facility in the Sycamore Canyon." I said, "Yeah." And I could see his face change. He said, "Well, I know you're not crazy because I had an experience too." And I said, "Would you be willing to share it with me?" And he paused and he looked down at the floor, and then he brought his hands up, and his hands were trembling very noticeably. And there was a long pause, and he said, I don't really know if I should talk about this. I haven't told anybody about this in 10 years since it happened, not even my girlfriend." And I said, "Well, it's fine. If you don't want to share it, I understand. We have a lot of witnesses who don't want to share much in the way of detail." I said, if it's your identity that you want to be kept in secret, I will honor that. And you have my word. I will not give your identity or even where you live, any details other than I won't even use your name. And he said, "Well," he goes, what happened to me was about 6 miles into Sycamore Canyon, at this place called Sycamore Gap, which if you look between Black Mountain and Cadre Mountain, you'll see the gap, and there's a trail that goes down into Sycamore Basin from there called the Dogi Trail, D-O-G-I. It's now got a gate, and it forbids any type of motorized traffic. Back then, there was no gate, and the trail was a lot rougher. And that's when he drove his dirt bike up there on the bed of a truck. He was in his senior year of school, and he unloaded the bike. He was a bodybuilder at the time. He weighed just over 200 pounds. And so he took the bike off of the ramp and went for his ride down into Sycamore Basin. This is broad daylight during the day. So he goes down into the basin and suddenly hears a crack, and he could feel the bullet go right past his head. And because he knew that somebody just shot at him and felt the wake of the bullet go past him, he thought he was going to be shot at again. So what he did is he said, "It was just instinctive. I rolled the bike." So he purposefully rolled and crashed the bike. And now he's pinned. One leg is pinned under the bike, and he's laying there with dust all around him. He told us that as the dust cleared, he saw 2 Humvees pull up. And what he said were a dozen soldiers spilled out of the Humvees. The first one jumped on him and drove his knee into his chest. And as he did so, he didn't realize until later, after the adrenaline rush was gone, that the man cracked his clavicle, his collarbone, and cracked a rib. So now he's injured. He doesn't know it at the time because he's so scared and the adrenaline's going. And he's pinned down. He's got the muzzle of an M4 carbine right in his nose. And the man said, "I almost killed you. Don't move." And so he put his hands up right away. He said, please, I didn't know I was trespassing. I had no idea. I didn't see any trespassing signs. And the guy said, "Be quiet." Another man came over and patted him down, pulled out his wallet, and held it up over his shoulder. One of the men behind him took the wallet and walked back to the Humvee. And moments later, he doesn't know how long it transpired because of the fear that was going through him. This man walked back and was holding his ID in the air. And he said his first name, middle name, last name, his current address. Then he mentioned his previous address and his previous adopted parents, because this young man was adopted. He had a set of adopted parents that he was given to at birth. They mentioned their names and their current address as well. So now he realizes the point that they're trying to prove is they obviously run his ID in a database in the Humvee, a mobile database, just like the police have, and they know everything about him. So as the man that appeared to be in charge walked up, and again, no name tape, no patches, nothing. They had camouflage uniforms, helmets, M4 carbines, body armor, and sidearms. So So this man walks up with the ID and he said, look, we're going to let you go. But if you tell anybody about this and mention this to anybody, you're in big trouble. And we know who you are. If you think we don't know who you are and where you live, you're mistaken. And he threw the ID down, and he motioned, the man that was in charge motioned to the young soldier that was laying on the guy with his knee to get him up. So the man that's on this kid's chest stands up, reaches down with one arm. So he's got his rifle in one hand, his carbine in one hand, and he reaches down with one arm, and he pulls this kid with one arm up to the standing position from under a bike that weighs who knows how many hundreds of pounds. And so again, he thought about it later. He didn't think about it in the moment, but this man was so strong, he pulled him up with one arm. And now they're saying, get your bike up and get out of here. So he very cautiously picks up his bike. He gets on the bike, and he said his immediate concern at the time was, is it going to start? He's terrified that it won't start. So he kicks it the first time, and it starts on the first go. And there's a little bit of relief. And he turns and looks at these men. And he said, as he's looking at them, that there was one standout feature. And this is the thing that struck me and struck Tom Dongo as I talked to Tom about it later. He said he looked at their eyes, and their eyes were black. He said, I don't think they were human. And I said, wait. I'm not following what you're saying. You're saying they were soldiers, right? And he goes, well, yeah, they were dressed like soldiers. They had Humvees. But when they were standing there looking at me, their eyes looked black. And I said, are you sure you were able to be close enough to them? He goes, yeah, they were right there. They were right there in front of me, all 12 of them staring at me, and they had black eyes. And I said, okay, I follow you. What else happened? He said, well, at that point, I revved my bike, and I'm going back up the way I came. And there's switchbacks. It's a very steep precipice going up to the top. And he said, I just got this inkling that I had to look over my shoulder and look behind me. So he stops his bike, and he looks over behind him, and there's a set of red rock formations. I can send you photographs of this immediate area too. We've been there when we were investigating this. And among the red rock formations are sheer red rock walls. They're just sheer plain red walls. And he's looking at one of them, and there's a opening on one of the red rock walls leading into a black chasm of sorts. And he sees the Humvees go down into it as if there's a ramp, and they're going down underground. After the second one goes in, a door slid across. It was camouflaged to look exactly like the red rock wall. And so at this point, he's telling the story. I'm stunned. I was like, do you know exactly where this is? And he said, yeah, I remember where it's at roughly. And I said, would you be willing to point it out on Google Earth Pro? And he utterly refused. He said, there's no way. There's no way I'm going on an iPad or a computer that has a camera and a microphone and point that out. He said, you understand, these people are watching me. And I said, well, how do you know they're watching you? He said, because they check up on me. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you've heard of the Men in Black, right? And I said, of course. He said, well, one of the last times they checked up on me, I was at the Cottonwood Walmart. He said, I was in an aisle all by myself. And he said, suddenly these two guys are blocking both ends of the aisle and walking toward me. And he said, they were very pale, and they had old-fashioned suits on. He said, it was over 100 degrees outside. These suits would be very hot. He said, they walked up to me, and they called out to me and said, how are you doing? He said, I just stood there not knowing what to say to them because I realized where they were coming from. He said, they just stared at me for a while. I stared back at them. I said, I'm fine. Is there anything I can do for you, gentlemen? They said, no, we just want to make sure you're doing okay. Then they both walked out. Now he's scared again. And he figures, I want to see what they're driving. I want to see where they're going to. He runs out toward the front, and he doesn't see them. They've virtually vanished. He doesn't see a car. He doesn't see them anymore. And so he says, you see, these people still check up on me from time to time. And he said, this was years after the incident happened. So when I got this account from this young man, I come home and I turn on the computer and I get on the Facebook messenger box, and right away I can't wait to tell Tom because we share everything with Tom Dongo. And I get the first few sentences typed and send it. Tom, you're never gonna believe this. I met a witness who was shot at and pinned under his bike, held at gunpoint. His ID was run, and he says it was 6 miles into a canyon. I hit send. Tom is reading it as I'm typing the next paragraph to describe it. And Tom sends before I even send the next paragraph and says, oh, that must be Sycamore Canyon. And I'm like, how the heck could he know that? I just said a canyon. I didn't type Sycamore Canyon yet. And then he went further. He said, that must be near Black Mountain. I was like, holy smokes. Tom was really on top of this. So in conversating with him over a period after that first paragraph, he said, yeah. He goes, that area around Black Mountain is an area I won't go, because there's an underground entrance there as well. And whatever firm is in that part of the underground facility, they're working hand in hand with humanoid extraterrestrials. And I said, well, what makes you say that? He said, because I've interviewed a lot of other witnesses who have encountered those exact same people that are dressed like soldiers, but they're incredibly strong. They're relatively expressionless with emotion, and they have black eyes. And I said, well, this is the first time I've heard of it, Tom. And he just kind of waved his hand. He goes, stay away from it. It's not a healthy place to be. It's dangerous. And so we've gone down there quite a few times to photograph the area. I talked to the witness again, not quite a year later, to see if anything in his story would change. And it didn't. His story was consistent from point A to point B as he told it. And I again asked him, and he was outside. He wouldn't even come inside where there were computers and cell phones and so on. I said, trust me, I don't have a cell phone. Would you please do me that favor and point at Google Earth where you saw this? And again, the young man refused. And I said, well, what if I cover the camera and you don't speak? I said, as soon as we go in the room, I'll already have the map up. You don't have to speak, so voice recognition is out of the game. And then I'll have the camera covered, so don't worry about that. And he reluctantly agreed. And what he did was he came in and he was looking. I had the Sycamore Basin up where I knew he had the encounter on the opposite side of Sycamore Gap. And he ran his finger in a circle. He said, right in this general area here. And so the circle he made with his finger covered roughly 1.5 to 2 square miles. So I have a relative idea to answer your question of a couple minutes ago of where that entrance is. And then we've got multiple leads from other people who claim they know where there's vent pipes, where entrances may be. And those are actively under investigation literally now. But the whole area, the size and scale of this particular facility is something to behold, because when you do talk to some of these witnesses who have seen vent pipes, who have seen entrances or encountered these people, and then you look at a map and you're like, okay, this is 17 miles from where this particular account happened, and this account is 9 miles from where that one happened. You end up having a very vast area of supposed vent pipes, entrances, areas where vehicles can go in. We had another account that was from a trucking company in California, and they're just rented trucks. They have a company where you can get a full 16-wheeler with an empty boxcar. You hire them, and they'll take your freight from point A to point B, wherever it may be, in a guaranteed time. And they have a whole fleet. Now, these guys are used to getting freight that's delivered to military facilities and so on from a port. I think it's in San Francisco, I think it was. I may be mistaken. But as the account went, which was from one driver, he said everything was basically routine. They weren't naturally able to see the manifest of what they were hauling, because they wouldn't normally do that anyways. And their instructions were to drive to Arizona, central Arizona. They would get on the I-17 from the 10. They would drive north to the Camp Verde exit. And from there, they were to go to a dirt road, which we now know is the Bill Gray Road, which drives almost straight toward Black Mountain, where really close to the account of the young guy who was shot off of his motorcycle. They said they got on the road and they're going down the road, and they're now really perplexed because there's nothing out there. So if anybody drives on the Bill Gray Road area, it's just desert. There's nothing there. And these men come upon suddenly a roadblock with 2 Humvees, with both of the bonnets of the Humvees at an apex blocking the road, and military men blocking the approach even to the Humvees. The trucks are flagged to a stop. And a military man, again, with no name tape, no patches, no way of identifying who he is at all, but looks military, walks up and gets on the running board. The man winds down the window and said, listen carefully, I have instructions for you. He said that you're going to drive through the Humvees, and the Humvees are going to block the second truck. Only one truck will go through at a time. You, as the first truck, must listen carefully. He said another one of my men will be down the road. He's going to line you up in a certain spot on the side of the road, and once you're in the spot where you need to be, he will signal you to stop and turn off your motor. He said, do you understand so far? The driver said, yes, I understand. He said, now when they're uncoupling the truck, one of my men will be on your running board again, just as I am, and you are not to look anywhere else but straight ahead. He said that the freight will be uncoupled, but you're not to look in your rear view mirror, you're not to look in your side view mirror, and you're certainly not going to turn and look behind you, or you'll be in a great deal of trouble. Do you understand? And the driver said, yes. He said, this is how we operate here. He said, the rest of your fleet will be told the exact same. When you're given the okay, you can then turn your truck around and go back the way you came. The Humvees will let you through, and we will admit the second truck." He said, "Do you understand?" The driver said, "Yes." So the Humvees parted. He's waved to go through. He goes over a little bit of a hill and down into a swale. Down the swale is a lone man, again, dressed in Army gear. The man gets him to line up exactly where he wants the truck to be, gives him a single stop and turn off his motor. He does so. Then he jumps up on the sideboard, just as he's warned this man will do. And the man says, "Listen up. You were told to look straight ahead. Now's the time to look straight ahead. Do not look in your rearview mirror. Do not look in the side view mirrors. Do you understand?" He said, "Yes." So now I can feel the truck shimmying. Somebody's uncoupling the freight from the actual truck itself. And he waits for a little while. He doesn't know how much time goes on. And then he's given the go-ahead. "Okay, you can turn around and go back the way you came." He turns around in this wide, dusty patch, and his truck is gone. Or I should say the freight is gone. But all that's there is a dusty patch of road. There's nothing to indicate where the freight went. And he's looking left and right, and there's just empty desert, nothing. And this one lone soldier who gave him instructions standing there. So he kind of shrugged and figured, well, that was weird. He drives on. The two Humvees let him through, and he sees the other men waiting. Off he goes, and he knows that they're going to each go through the exact same thing, which they did. And as it was, they of course, in those cases where they're driving their freight from point A to point B, they sign non-disclosure agreements, and they're used to doing that. Sometimes they deliver freight to certain military installations. In this particular case, he felt it was so strange because he was reading accounts about the Sonoma area and strange black helicopters appearing out of nowhere and so on. He thought, well, it must have something to do with that. It must furthermore have something to do with the underground base. They must have taken our freight underground. And so he put that account out there, and I thought it was even though it's very vague, he didn't see anything incredibly extraordinary. He didn't even see the freight going underground, but common sense, where did it go? In a short period of time, he could feel the truck shimmying as it was uncoupled, and they had to wait for probably the length of time it took for them to lower it in a hydraulic elevator, and then for the ramp to come back up, and then he's given the go-ahead to turn around and leave. So that, again, the Bill Gray Road area is just a nondescript. There's a few ranches out there, but other than that, there's nothing there, and it leads straight to Black Mountain, which is the same area where Tom Doggo warned that there are these men that are potentially hybrid super soldiers that guard the facility and have black eyes.
That's so interesting to me, and that has to absolutely drive whoever is responsible for those installations absolutely nuts that they have to reveal themselves like that. But it seems like the dots to connect are just going to be the same dots that we've always connected when there was something buried, whether it's going to be the logistics, it's going to be the mundane, like you mentioned, like the air handling systems, the things that they have to have that are always going to be the weak points of any of those installations.
Yes. Now, a recent one I can share with you, which was one of the key points for Melinda Leslie at our lecture in Contact in the Desert. She met 5 witnesses who I don't believe are even from Arizona, who wanted to hike Secret Canyon. And Secret Canyon is another whole can of worms as far as anomalous activity, high strangeness, as well as this paramilitary contracted activity. Very strange stuff in Secret Canyon. Secret Canyon is also incredibly difficult to get to. There's a rough road, I think it's called Forest Road 521, that gets to it. And they actually discourage people from going down that road because there's what's called the gatekeeper, which is a set of boulders that if you can't clear those boulders, it'll rip out the bottoms of most vehicles. You can't go down the road. And so naturally, that's one way of deterring traffic from going in there. And very few vehicles do go down that road. The most that it gets is foot traffic. People will walk down it. At the end of the road is the Vultee Arch Trailhead. And then second to that, right before the Vultee Arch Trailhead, is the Secret Mountain or Secret Canyon Trailhead. And that's where the famous disappearance of David Barclay Miller had occurred. And it's a really, really vast area. The canyon itself, I believe, is about 3.5 miles long. And the trailhead is, I would call it a misnomer, because it says the trailhead is the start of the Secret Mountain Trail, and it actually isn't. You have to walk across a dry wash from the dirt parking lot, uphill. And I think you gain over 1,800 feet to the actual trailhead 2.5 miles away. So once you get that 2.5 miles into this precipice, On your immediate left is a really narrow, it's beautiful, a narrow open mouth of a canyon with 700-foot walls on both sides. I've got photographs of it, so I can send this to you as well. It's absolutely beautiful. And as you go around a sharp bend inside that canyon, which is immediately to your left as you're looking at it from the trail, you're now in the actual secret canyon. And so Secret Canyon's quite a ways in to get to it. First by a nearly impassable dirt road, and then the trailhead, which has a dirt parking lot on the side of a dry wash, 2.5 miles from there to get to the actual canyon itself. And nobody knows exactly where David Miller had disappeared up there. But this recent account, which Melinda Leslie got from these 5 witnesses who were ecstatic about what they had seen, they had gone hiking in there. And I think they were backpacking, and they had gotten really far into the canyon, nearly to the end of the canyon. And they sat down to have their trail lunch. And so they're breaking out their food and their water and their trail mix and such. And they're laying down on the ground, looking up beyond the trees. And when you get that far in, there's beautiful ponderosa pine trees that are probably 3 or 4 stories high, and the sweet smell of the ponderosa pine. It's a beautiful spot. Now, as they're laying on their backs, they suddenly hear a really loud roar of a jet turbine, and they're all looking up to see where this loud roar is coming from. And naturally, because the canyon walls are so narrow, it's just magnifying this roar of a turbine engine. They look up and they see what looks like a Harrier jet with its rotors turned down, so it's barely coasting forward while it's hovering. And as they're watching it, they see the sheer canyon wall open up. And so it opens up, and this just happened, I think, probably a month before Contact in the Desert. So Melinda was really excited to hear this account and be able to share it. And as this ramp opens up, there's what looks like a hangar inside the side of the mountainside. The Harrier jet slowly goes into this open door, and the door closes behind it. So naturally, these 5 people are not overreacting, but they're super excited about what they're seeing. And oh my gosh, look at that. One of them gets the idea, why don't we go up there and see if we can we can get to the edge of the door. So now they're actually climbing through this thick undergrowth up this nearly sheer and impassable precipice. And they do finally reach a point where they can't get any higher. And they're looking up above them to where the door is. And it's so seamless that they can't see any straight lines. She said that the witnesses were telling her, we were looking for hard edges and we could see none. But it did open up into a classic, like hangar door that was relatively rectangular. But even that close, being directly under it, there was no evidence of that hangar door. And that just happened. That just happened barely a month and a half ago. And those witnesses she's still in contact with. And they're even so adamant that they're, I guess, willing to come back and point out the spot. So that's another set of witnesses that we're really anxious to talk to some more.
And to me, that one, what's so interesting about that is if you were just a layperson, you wouldn't think, if you were making up a story, you wouldn't think to make it a Harrier that was slowly coming in to, and the noise from a Harrier in hover would be absolutely like gobsmacking at that range. That just makes that makes sense to me that that's the aircraft that they would be using for that type of stuff. And also if that was their landing scenario, and also again, that's not, someone would just say, yeah, it was just a jet that went into the wall. That's like that kind of detail is very convincing.
Right. There's a lot of strange air traffic back there. So the black helicopters we mentioned that happen to be unmarked. That's one of the things a lot of the locals like to try to debunk, especially the locals who own their planes at the Chinese Sedona airport. They say, oh, that's just ridiculous. The Army trains here all the time, and of course they refuel at our airport. But what these defense contractors have done, or I should say the aerospace and defense companies that are underground out here, is they've somebody in the Pentagon, probably the people that they receive a lot of the black budget funding through, who pulls a lot of sway, has specifically arranged for certain units to actually do legit training exercises, which take them through here and require them to refuel at the Sedona airport. And what it does is it's a masking operation. So they're getting their legit training flights, of course, but it's a masking operation for the paramilitary contractor Air Force, which does have the same hardware as they do. They do fly Ospreys, which the Marine Corps uses. They do fly Blackhawks, of course. They do fly Apaches. They do fly the Cobras, which the Marines also use, except there's no markings on the Marines use them. There's no serial numbers on them and no markings. So I've got photographs myself of some of the legit units that actually train and refuel here. The 3rd Cavalry, of course, from Texas. They're here at least once a year, sometimes several times a year.
Does 160th Sword, or do they train out of there too? We've had them around sometimes up here as well.
They will come out of, I believe it's Colorado. I'd have to double check my notes, but I think they come from, they'll train at Fort Carson, and then from Fort Carson they'll fly down this way right through Sedona.
And those are black helicopters.
They're black helicopters, and so it's a perfect masking operation arranged by somebody in the Pentagon to have the legit training operations flying through here and refueling at the Sedona airport. And then that covers more or less the paramilitary contractor Air Force, which I recently confirmed with one of our whistleblowers. There is what will you call it? It's a black Air Force, I guess you could call it. They have their own fighter jets, complete with F-35s, which is it's an incredibly expensive piece of hardware, and it's privately contracted military that works for these aerospace defense contractors. And these guys fly cover for the test flights that are coming up out of the Sycamore Basin. So we ourselves see the black helicopters all the time. And all you have to do is look up. I usually have a binocular with me, at least sometimes binoculars. You look up and you don't see a serial on them. You don't see a squadron, like the cavalry unit, for example. They have the cross sabers, and they'll have the 3rd Cavalry will have a big 3 under it in gold. And then sometimes each of the squadrons has a logo. One of them has like a skull and crossbones, for instance. I've seen them here often. You'll not see any of those markings at all on the other black helicopters that are flying through here. So when we look at Secret Canyon and the fact that so many of these black helicopters are flying very low and going into that canyon for a very long time, and many people have seen them, it brings the question forth, what are they doing? Why are they going in there? There's nothing in there. Well, after Beyond Skinwalker came out, and there was just a very basic mention of Secret Canyon in the end of one of the episodes, several old Air Force pilots had contacted and made comments. Well, I have my old Air Force map of that region, because we used to fly over that region when I was stationed at Luke Air Force Base, and my 1974 map has Secret Canyon and that whole area listed as a military reserve. What the heck does that mean? A military reserve, which in an area that is now U.S. Forest Service land? Very, very curious. And then we got a second man who said the exact same thing. He said, I was in the Air Force in the 70s. I have my old maps. My map lists the Secret Canyon area as a military reserve. So again, there's more to Secret Canyon than meets the eye. But specifically when it comes to the David Barclay Miller story, the official story goes that David was working for U.S. Forest Service. He became an only child. His other 2 siblings had passed away at very young age, so he was his parents' only child left over, and he was the captain. He was very athletic. He was the captain, I think, of his rowing team. They said he excelled at every athletic event that he went to. He became an Eagle Scout, which is obviously not easy to do. I think you mentioned you were an Eagle Scout, did you not?
No, I never made it that far. I was a Boy Scout, but not an Eagle Scout.
You can appreciate how difficult it is to reach Eagle Scout and all the things that
it's an accomplishment, especially for a young person.
Very much. And he had reached that level of status in the Boy Scouts and was very proud of it. Loved nature, loved to spend time outside. And so when he came here from Maryland, I believe it was, he acclimated himself to the desert very well. He wanted to work for the U.S. Forest Service, got the job, and spent a lot of time out in the forest. He was expert at desert survival. He knew how much water he had to carry. He had common sense for the how-tos and do's and don'ts of being out in the desert. Well, as the official story goes, he had told some people he was going hiking in Secret Canyon and never came back. He parked his car at the Vultee Trail trailhead, which is just past the Secret Mountain trailhead, walked back to the Secret Mountain trailhead and into Secret Canyon, and was never seen again. There were 2 massive manhunts for him, including tracking dogs, and the tracking dogs came up with a loss. They came to kind of a sandy pit in a dry wash, and that's where his scent just disappeared. There was nothing beyond there. So the family also came out and did their own search. Nothing was ever found of him. There was no hide nor hair found of this young man, 22 years old, and just vanished off the face of the earth. Now, recently, since Beyond Skinwalker came, there are 2 people that contacted us who had actually worked for the U.S. Forest Service, Coconino County, which is the same outfit he was with, and said that they worked with David, and that whenever David had gotten to a point where he was going out in the canyon, he had told them that he was going to personally look into the activity of the black helicopters in Secret Canyon, which to me is mind-blowing. There's nothing in print about that until these two guys that work for Coconino County Forest Service told us this, two separate individuals. And they said they were told after his disappearance, and they brought that up to the visiting law enforcement, not to talk about that. It's not to be shared beyond the office. The other Forest Service individuals were no longer allowed to talk about it. Simply, they had gone hiking and disappeared, and to leave the fantasy part of going to look for black helicopters out of it, out of respect for the family. So they did just that. They listened to what they were told. They weren't talking about it until Beyond Skinwalker had brought up a lot of the different nefarious activities of black helicopters and military activity in the area. And these two individuals who now have families and are also scared, they don't really want to go on the record, but it's verifiable that they actually work for the U.S. Forest Service with David. And one of them said, they both corroborated exactly word for word that he said he was going to go look at the, investigate for himself the source of military activity and black helicopters in Secret Canyon, and never came back. Never found again. And he's probably, there's other disappearances too, but he's probably the most famous of all the disappearances. That was in 1998 when he vanished. And there's been disappearances since, and there's been disappearances before then. The most recent one was a girl that most of the town knew, a girl that worked in the floral department of the local Safeway, and her name is Yolande Miller. And she disappeared one night. She said that she was going to go meet someone, is what she told her roommate. They said that she takes her dog with her everywhere, but she left her dog at home. And she was reported missing shortly thereafter. She never made it to Jerome, where she had told people she was going to meet someone. Her car was found at Loy Canyon Trailhead. So if you're looking at the satellite imagery, Loy Canyon is more or less the farthest west canyon, closer to Sycamore Gap that I was telling you about, Black Mountain and Castor Mountain. It's a big canyon, and it's a beautiful canyon. It's a really pretty spot. But the trail into Loy Canyon goes up into the mountains to the Secret Mountain Trailhead. And Secret Mountain Trailhead more or less goes along the McGeehan Rim, looking down into the canyons, and it's in thick pine forest. They found her car there, and no trace of her beyond that. And she has been a mystery since then. There's been no witness accounts of anyone seeing her, no tips on anything that may have happened to her, but she's the most recent disappearance. And unfortunately, it seems, and there'll be people that watch this that will call it BS, but a lot of the disappearances around here do more or less get swept under the carpet. It doesn't really make the news. If it does make the news, it's kind of a footnote, and it's like they're anxious to kind of get past it. And I think probably one of the main reasons is because Sedona has become such a major tourist destination, they don't want a lot of the people that are visiting and have to have a little bit of time to relax in Red Rock country to look at a newspaper and say, oh my gosh, somebody vanished mysteriously here. I think I picked the wrong place to go on vacation. So I don't know, but I think that a lot of the stories are kind of swept under the carpet for that very reason, that this town and everything in it more or less facilitates the tourist industry, because there's nothing else here other than the tourist industry, the hotels and the spas and so on. And so if that type of story gets out there that people disappear regularly around here, it would naturally be a deterrent for people that want to have their vacation here. We were warned when we were telling another friend of ours who's an investigator also that we were looking into the underground entrances in the Sycamore Basin area by a friend who said, look, I don't think you should both do that. I would suggest that you don't go in there anymore. And we said, well, why would you say that? This is really vastly important. If there's unconstitutional civilian facilities, such as these aerospace and defense, because they are civilian. They may have clearance and security, but they're still civilian agencies and they're still subject to constitutional law. He said, granted, I understand that much, but two of my friends, he said, a husband and wife, just like the two of you, were going in there, and they said they found something, and they wanted me to come with them. And I told him I don't want to have any involvement with the government, because he had also had a bad encounter in front of Black Mountain where he was setting up his equipment, and a Black Hawk helicopter came in as he was taking measurements of electromagnetic activity coming up through the ground. And the Black Hawk lowered itself over top of him, blowing his table over, blowing his computer off the table. And
that's a pretty unambiguous, like, that's that's only has one meaning.
Only one. They clearly want him gone. And so he threw his stuff in the truck, and he was waving them off like, fine, you win, I'm out of here. And they still persist on hovering right over his vehicle. So he jumped in the vehicle, and he's driving down Bill Gray Road. And they followed him all the way down Bill Gray Road until he got to the main road. And once they realized he was going home, they turned around and went back toward Black Mountain. So in this particular case, the same man, having had that experience, was not going to have anything to do with anything remotely close to any of the rumored military operations, the underground facilities or entrances he was staying away from on purpose. He told these two friends of his, I don't want to have anything to do with it. If you're going to go there, fine, I can't stop you, but I don't think you should. Well, those two people disappeared, and they were later found with no clothes on, dead, and draped over a barbed wire fence out there in Sycamore Basin. And so he told Alexander and myself about that, and we had already been frightened enough by being warned by a man with a DOD badge and then shot at later in Boynton Canyon. So we knew that these people that are out there very serious about keeping their operation secret. But I think it was really, again, when Beyond Skinwalker came and they looked into it, they really more or less opened up that can of worms in an official sense, where most of the people that were investigating it up to that point didn't have much in the way of resources, certainly didn't have the technology that those guys brought to bear. I mean, they had their, they called it a UFO-DAP, which is a camera in a bulbous casing. I didn't get to see it whenever they brought it here, but they were describing what they were setting up. And they said, we've got some toys that have never been used before, and we're really excited to try them out. And that was one of the two that they mentioned. And I think the first night they had set up, they caught a UAP, coming down right over Bradshaw Ranch. It was a spectacular catch because the camera itself is quick. Whoever made it realizes that most people, when they do have a cell phone or they do have a camera, when something anomalous appears above them, if they're quick enough to turn it on and quick enough to turn a flash on and turn a flash off, by the time they've got their camera up, whatever it is, it's gone. And that's the big thing. You always hear people saying, well, why did you get a photograph of this? Why did you get a photograph of that? When we talk about the peanut-shaped UFO that we saw, which was the best structured sighting I have ever had. I doubt I'll ever see anything like that again outside of Flagstaff. The main comment that people say is, well, why didn't you get a photograph of it? Everybody's got a cell phone. We don't. We're the only couple that we know of that don't have a cell phone. We hate cell phones and try to keep that stay as cell phone free as possible.
Oh, I love it. Have one and hate it.
It's because then you don't have freedom either. I'm a windbag. I like to talk, and so if I had a cell phone, I would never get off of it. And with my Civil War reenacting friends and my World War II reenacting friends, if you get me talking to them, and you get us history geeks talking, we never stop. I can be on the phone for 4 hours, so I'm safer without a cell phone. But in point of fact, most people that do even have the cell phones, I can't remember who I was talking to recently, but somebody was making a really good point. They said you can have it in your hand. And when you see something that's so strikingly anomalous, you can forget that's in your hand because you're so dumbstruck exactly with what you're seeing that by the time it's gone, you're like, oh my gosh, I have my phone in my hand. I didn't videotape it or didn't get a still photograph of it. And that's just the way the human mind works. Everyone wants to see something anomalous. I can't imagine there's anybody alive that it's part of the human nature is to see something that no one else has seen or to want to see something that is out of this world. And so often when we do, our brains are so conditioned to our three-dimensional world that something goes beyond the three-dimensional world appears, your brain is suddenly telling you, you're not actually seeing this. Because that's what my mind was literally telling my inner voice when I saw that peanut-shaped craft in Flagstaff.
I actually saw your illustration of it. That's a fantastic illustration, by the way, but it gives a good idea of what you guys saw. Thank you.
It was massive. It was bigger than our house. And I'll never forget it. It was one of the best sightings, the best sighting of a structured craft I've ever had. And I'll never forget the date. We even remembered the music we were listening to at the time. It was one of those things that was so visceral that every detail of that night stands out, and I'll never forget it. But people ask, well, why didn't you think if it was right there and you could throw a tennis ball at it, why did you think to step out and get a photograph of it? And again, first of all, we didn't have a cell phone. And second of all, I didn't want to. I remember my instinct was, whatever this is, I don't have any control of it. I want to get out of here because to me, it felt like it was there to take somebody. And I remember Alexandra was slowing down. I remember shouting at her in explicatives to speed up and get away. And as we did, we were going down a hill and looking over my shoulder. That's when that spotlight I was talking about came out. And to this day, I don't regret that we didn't stop, because whoever that spotlight was meant for probably got, an eyeful when they came up the hill. And we did pass a car that was coming up the hill toward that spotlight.
Well, the other thing with, thinking that people should automatically think to take a photo with their cell phone. And, I have never seen anything anomalous in the sky that I couldn't identify. But I feel like sometimes when I am with my children, what is happening is just so meaningful and sweet and almost spiritual in its kind of depth of experience, that I don't want to take a picture of it. I just want to hold it and have it be a part of me, and not ruin the moment with a photo. And I would think that could be, having listened to experiencers and their stories, I could think that could be a component as well, where I'm here right now. I'm absorbing this. Like this is a defining instant for me, and I don't care about photos. I don't care if no one believes me. I'm going to be present in this moment right now and take it for what it is.
That's a good point. I think in so many cases, you'll hear that a lot from a lot of the witnesses here in Sedona, because the activity here, and not all of it, is the advanced test craft. There is legitimate NHI in the skies here as well. And you'll hear a lot of people describe it as a spiritual experience. And I tend to agree with that, because it is something that when you see it, you tend to feel an otherworldly feeling. Then it's sometimes accompanied by a fear, but it's followed by a state of euphoria. When we came home from seeing the peanut-shaped craft, the adrenaline rush from the fear turned into excitement. And the excitement turned into this kind of a rush of a feeling where it's like you get off the roller coaster, you want to do it again. I guess that's the best way to go. You want to see something again. And when I saw what I saw in Pennsylvania when I was 13 years old, again, the same type of thing. I was terrified. And it wasn't until a few days after when I was able to really calm myself and think in the context of what I had seen and what the investigators from PASU had said, statistically at your age, you should not have been able to see something like this. And they really pushed that statistic on me, realized how rare of a sighting it was. I wanted to see something more. It's not greedy to want to see something that's statistically impossible. It's in human nature. You want to prove again to yourself that these things do exist. And really, I think I might have said this to you, the time in Sedona, more so than the time that I was in Pennsylvania when I was in my youth, has proven that most of the things that parents tell their children do not exist, do in fact exist, the good and the bad. So, the beings from other dimensions and the beings from other realms and up in space do in fact exist. And like people, some of them are good, some of them are bad. But it seems like the majority of them are good. And you hear people have these encounters, just particularly in the Sedona area, when you're listening to witnesses talk about what they've seen. And probably the blatant majority of them are positive, and they'll describe it as a spiritual experience, like you said. So not concentrating on going out with a camera and just concentrating on absorbing the instances when they happen is probably the best way to take it. And it increases the likelihood of actually having those encounters, at least with the Sedona. So you've probably heard the Bradshaw Ranch being compared to Skinwalker Ranch in the plethora of different types of anomalous activity and high strangeness, as they call it now. And they are similar, whereas Bradshaw Ranch tends to have more positive things happening, and the Skinwalker Ranch tends to have more negative things and frightening things happening. And even Linda Bradshaw, I think one of the reasons, and I bring this up because of you using the spiritual word and describing the whole situation of seeing something anomalous. She was a very spiritual lady, and not just, it wasn't just that she might have been Christian or Buddhist or something else. She took a little bit from all different types of religion. I wish I could have met her. Unfortunately, I never got to meet her, but I've talked to her family and her son, and she was an overwhelmingly spiritual, kind, and loving lady. And as it turns out, it seems that the phenomenon on Bradshaw Ranch, now I'll use an example. So the orb phenomena, which is the most common thing that you could see when you go there. When you both come down, that's probably something you'll see and be able to photograph on your first night at the ranch. So again, you've got that open invite. When you come down here, we'll take you out there And
I would love to go. It was magical by day, and I can't even imagine by night.
But by night, it's a different creature altogether at night, no pun intended. And the orb activity, thanks to Tom Dongo, I was kind of mistaking it for just something that was generally anomalous, but very commonly seen there. And I was mistaken. It's a sentient intelligence. And Tom, over lunch at one point in time, we were showing him some of our orb photographs. And he said, it's intelligent. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, it's kind of like a dog. You can talk to it and it'll react somewhat to orders or things that you prompt it to do. And I said, really? Like how? Do you have an example? He said, sure. He said, you remember I told you when you go to Bradshaw Ranch to take photographs, but take sets of two. So if something shows up that's anomalous, you have a second frame to prove once if there's something there. If it's anomalous, two, you can get scale from it if it's moving and so on. So always take two photographs. He said, but with the orb phenomenon, he said, once you see one, he said, stop right where you are and speak to it. And he said, speak honestly and kindly from the heart. And he said, ask it to show up in the hundreds in the next frame. He said, after you ask it, and he said, be sure to say please, take the photograph and see what happens. He said, if they all show up, he said, then ask them that in a few seconds, you're going to take another frame of the same spot and ask them to kindly step out of the photograph. He said, I bet you'll see that they're not there. So a few days after he said this, we rather skeptically went over to the ranch one night, and there are certain areas where the orb activity is very, very dense. So by the front gate, that's an area where you tend to see more orb activity. And then between the old historical adobe, the corner of it, and where it's closest to the main ranch house, it's also, yes, that spot, that corner is very, very active for orb activity.
Is that there's aloe there, isn't there? Or is that where the aloe plants right along?
Yes.
Right in there?
Yes, right there. Right, that same spot. That area is very hot for orb activity. And so we went there shortly after talking to Tom, and I was taking photographs, and sure enough, I saw one lone red orb show up. And I told Alexander, there's one there. I'm going to do what Tom said. So I put the camera down, and I spoke out loud. I said, I see you. Thank you for showing up. In the highest vibration of love, I would like to invite you to show up by the hundreds if you can. Please feel free to show up in my photograph. If you can't, I understand. If you don't have enough energy, I understand. But I'd really like to see as many of you as possible. Please, in just a second here, I'm going to take a photograph. Are you ready? And I lifted the camera up, click, and I looked down, and the viewfinder was filled with hundreds and hundreds of orbs, blue ones, red ones, multiple colors. And I was really excited at that point. And I said, oh, thank you so much. I love you for that. Thank you so very much. I'm very, very grateful. Now I'm going to ask you very quickly, I want to take one more photograph to prove that you can hear me. Please, all of you step out of the frame. And I held the camera up, click. So just a matter of seconds went by between the first frame and the second frame. And just like Tom said, there was not one single orb in the frame. And so we've been able to test that, and I can't take credit for it. It was Tom's discovery. We've been able to test that over and over and over again. I've lost count of how many times, because we've got hundreds of orb photos at the ranch. And of course, that was another thing that frustrated Tom when he was out there, because he and Linda were using, it was before the days of digital photography, they were using 800 speed film and very good cameras and having good results with the orbs. But of course, the skeptics, which drove Tom crazy at the time, were saying, well, you're throwing handfuls of dust up, and then you're taking the picture really quick with a flash, and naturally you're catching molecules of dust in front of the lens. Or it's moisture. You sprayed a hose in the air and you're catching moisture molecules in the mist, and the water molecules are reflecting the flash. And Tom said, no, it's not. These are sentient, intelligent beings. They're coming through the portals, and that's what we're photographing. And he kind of gave up arguing the point, because there were always these professional photographer types, except one who was so rude with Tom. Tom said, if you think you know better, why don't you come out to the ranch and see if you can debunk this. You come out to the ranch, bring your camera, bring 800 speed film, and you try it for yourself. And the guy, as a professional photographer, was like, well, I'll do just that. And he came out one night with his camera, with his 800 speed film in it. And Tom said the guy looked ridiculous. He's out there throwing dust up in the air real quick and then whipping around, taking photographs of it. And he tried spraying their hose up in the air, I guess, and did a number of different things. And a couple weeks later, the guy called back and said, I owe you an apology. You were right. This is not dust. This is not moisture molecules. This is something else. But he wasn't willing to admit that it was something anomalous, but he was at least able to admit fault and say, well, thank you for giving me the challenge of coming out there to debunk it. And Tom said, I'm just done with you skeptics. I can't even use the exact words that Tom used, and something that might be heard by children. But he was really upset that so many people were taking his evidence that he had presented from the kindness of his heart, spending time out there in terrible conditions. Sometimes it was really hot, sometimes really cold. And he and Linda were out there photographing things, and most of the time nothing would happen. And then a fraction of time things would happen. They'd be able to catch it in this 800 speed film and have remarkable results. So doing that, having skeptics be not only, it's good to be skeptical, and Tom admits that too. As an investigator, he was very skeptical and would try to prove things to be something of natural occurrence. But when someone is a skeptic just to be a skeptic, and no matter how much evidence is presented to them, they just keep banging away at it. But not only banging away at it, then they get to be rude. And that was one of the things I think that really bothered Tom a lot. And he warned Alexander, said, if you guys ever go public with a lot of your evidence, no matter how good your evidence is, there'll be somebody out there that'll call you every name in the book. He said, you're just going to take arrows. You're going to be full of arrows. He goes, I'm full of arrows from skeptics. He said, I'm just tired of them. He goes, I won't make time for skeptics anymore. And so, I get that. He kind of got, naturally jaded from coming into it with an open heart and sharing evidence and sharing anecdotes from the time he spent there. 4 years, I think you said it was, consistently in good and bad weather out there at night with Linda, both of them staying up late at night, sometimes till 1 a.m. or later, looking for anomalous activity, capturing evidence, and then presenting it and having people be really rude with them about it. And they had a lot of evidence that they had accrued.
Speaking of evidence and the Beyond Skinwalker, some of the things that, like the tunnel that was uncovered, that to me, and all the evidence that you have of underground bases and your witnesses relating his experience of finding it to be very old. It makes sense that it would be old because it would have been so much easier to construct some of these things before there was the incessant presence of civilian and military satellites like over every inch of every part of the world. Did you get any sense for like how old are we talking? Like, was this Project Paperclip type stuff, like Hans Kammler or?
Sam, that's a really good question. And that comes to some of the best evidence we got in the past year, which we took with us to Contact in the Desert. And so to go back in time to Nazi Germany and Operation Paperclip, nearly all the people that they had a list of that they wanted were aeronautics engineers and just the best mathematicians and physicists that Germany had. And there were a lot of them, especially those guys at Peenemünde that were working on the V2 and the V1 project. There were 3 men on the paperclip list that were engineers that made underground bunkers. One of them was a man named Xavier Dorsch, Dorsch. Dorsch took over after his boss was killed in an airplane crash. And Hitler was so excited about the idea of moving German production underground because the Allies, by 1943, 44, especially 44, carpet bombing reached its peak. We were dropping so much tonnage of bombs, the Americans by day and the British by night, that anything above ground that had manufacturing capabilities was being completely flattened by bombs. If they tried to rebuild anything, naturally it was flattened by 24 hours later. Anything they tried to reconstruct was flattened. The Germans realized they had to move everything underground, and so the height of our bombing and the British bombing, statistically, the amount of tonnage dropped was in the fall of 1944. Guess when the height of German production and armaments and their new jets, the 262 that was coming out, was the exact same time.
Late 44.
Yes, late 44, the fall of 1944. They were maxing out production of armaments from everything simple like hand grenades. You can see my German Panzer Grenadier back here. The stuff that he was wearing, the steel hand grenade 43s, they were cranking those out in underground factories deep underground in secret places.
And the 262s.
They had no papers at the time, which was, yes, it was incredible that they managed to do it. And what was even more incredible is when the Allies came into the areas where these underground facilities were. Some of the first ones they saw were in the Peenemünde area, which is in Holland. And then they were also seeing these areas where they had gone in the mountains and they put their massive rail guns. So they had these railway guns that could shoot these shells that were the size of a locomotive, something like 27 miles away. Then they'd back the gun into a mountain where it couldn't be seen. Well, the underground facilities that they had made, which were all the way across Germany, but the majority of them were in the big ones were in Poland and East Prussia. They were so well made that when the Allies saw them, they were mind blown. You know, how they do this, how they make this. Well, we need to find out. We need to get their engineers. So in the research they did, very quick research, they were able to get somebody to squeal, and they came up with 3 names. Chief among them was this man, Dorsch. Xaver Dorsch was the man that ended up becoming the man in charge of the whole underground facility project in Germany, because his boss was killed in an airplane crash. And that man, prior to Dorsch, reported to Albert Speer. Albert Speer then in turn would report to Hitler. At that time, when Dorsch's boss was killed, and he's now suddenly holding the underground projects in his hands, Hitler met with him personally and said, look, the chain of command usually goes that you'll report to Speer, and I trust Speer, but you'll report directly to me. And there weren't too many people that actually had that position where they could report directly to Hitler, which of course meant reporting to Martin Bormann, because Martin Bormann was secretary, but that's more or less the same thing as reporting directly to Hitler. You had a question, I'm sorry.
No, I was, and then Kammler would have been one of those as well at that point, that had direct access to Hitler, wasn't he?
Yes. So our guys who are now fanning out our G2s and our intelligence men that are coming over are now looking for these people. They've got lists, they've got photographs and miniature dossiers. They found Dorsch and his 2 subordinates, and they right away packed them up and took them back to the United States. The time that they're in the United States is very sketchy. Nobody knows exactly where they were and exactly what they were doing, but suffice to say, they were obviously passing on.
Plying their trade.
Yes. So they told them, well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to drill test. You're going to make sure that the rock that you're drilling through, the crust that you're drilling through, is applicable to have an underground base. Because if it's not and it caves in, or there's too much of a high water table, you're going to have problems. They told them, the deeper you go, the more methane that comes out. So you have to have methane mitigation. All this detail that they spent and they squeezed out of these former Nazi engineers was then applied to our underground facilities as we entered the Cold War. So to answer your question, how old? It's a very good question, Sam. So thank you for bringing that up. In our research with this, and I'll refer to Dr. Richard Sauder, who wrote the books on underground bases. What we got from the Nazis was crucial in developing our underground base facilities that started immediately after World War II. So we're looking at the late 40s, and it looks like the date on most of these was 1950. It seems like 1950 was the magic year where they started making these facilities, the majority of them being in the American Southwest, and then some of them, there are some back east, there's some in Virginia, for example. But the bigger ones and the more sturdy ones, naturally, the American desert was ideal because of like you said, the sparse population. The Sedona area, as late as 1984, had only one traffic light in town. All the roads around the Sedona area in 1984 were unpaved. The only paved road in 1984 was 89A, the main road that goes north to south through town. So it was much more rural. Even as when I moved here in 1999, it was not a big town. It's still relatively small. You go shopping here, you still see the same faces of people that you see, and you wave and smile. It's still relatively a small town, and the people you don't recognize are usually tourists. But the underground bases, for the most part, really took hold. The projects took hold in 1950s, and they became active. From what I can tell, the existing one here in the Sycamore Basin was one of the original underground facilities. And it looks like when the Department of the Defense Nuclear Agency, the DNA, which is no longer called the DNA. It still exists, but it's got a different acronym now that they go by. But the Defense Nuclear Agency was tasked in 1960 to fan out, and they were working with the DoD, or I should say under the DoD, with DARPA. Naturally, DARPA comes in this story, and the U.S. Air Force. So you've got DARPA, the Defense Nuclear Agency, and the DoD overseeing the whole thing. And they come up with this extremely ambitious project. And the reason they come up with this project is they've got spies that tell the DoD that the Soviets now have intercontinental ballistic missiles that are nuclear warhead capable, which can penetrate a certain depth of ground and then explode at the average depth of our current, at the time, existing underground military bases. So now they're in a panic. What do we do? So they naturally think, well, we got to go deeper. And so DARPA, the Defense Nuclear Agency, and the U.S. Air Force all together are tasked with taking the basic principles that we learned from the Nazis and go deeper. So basically, that was the basic concept that was put forth in 1960. They specified that they wanted a minimum of 12 sites. So these guys go out, they do the drill testing, just like the Nazis did back in the 1940s, and they're looking for basically a soft upper crust, like what you have here in North Arizona, a lot of sandstone, with a hard basalt layer under it. So the soft upper crust ideally will absorb the incoming jet or kinetic energy of a rocket and dissipate some of that energy as it digs down into the ground. And then when it hits basalt and it detonates at the designated depth, the basalt is so hard that it will absorb a lot of the nuclear destructive power of the jet. So what they had done was they had laid out the plan that they want the minimum of these 12 facilities. They want them to go 4,000 to 5,000 feet subsurface. So that was their neck, which to me sounds incredible. When I was reading, I was like, that's incredible. I had no idea that they could go that deep. And that's exactly what they did. They spread out, they drill tested. Years later, they came back, and in 1975, they were ready to start preparing these facilities to either be expanded. And I believe the one here in Sedona, which is already existing, this is one of the reasons why it's so much bigger. They ended up going deeper and expanding that one. There's two other sites of the 12, so 3 total in Arizona. Besides the one here in the Sycamore Basin, there's 2 other sites, and those are in the northwest of Kingman, Arizona, an extremely rough and mountainous desert out there. One's called Site 2, and the other one's called Site 9, and that's the only identification that they go by, and that's in Dr. Richard Souter's Freedom of Information Act report. He even got, through the Freedom of Information Act, he even got a map of these sites, which shows where these deep sites are. And you can see it's not a very good map that's published, but you can see the spots in Arizona where they're marked. The third site, which they designated as in his book, as being south of the vicinity of Williams and Ash Fork. So if you look at your map and you look at where Ash Fork and Williams are and go due south, that's the Sycamore Basin. That's exactly where we've been triangulating these craft from coming up. It's due south of there, and then it goes to the Mingus Mountain and Woodchute Mountain, which is where the craft usually fly over, escorted by Black Hawk helicopters. So that's the area of major interest in this investigation, and we're focusing on that area intentionally now, as well as the Secret Mountain and Secret Canyon area. And when we were watching these craft come up, and they're coming up still every night. So, and I probably told you this in the previous podcast, so forgive me for repeating, but September 27th of the previous year, Belinda Leslie called us almost frantic with excitement. She said, "You have to get out here. You have to see this. There's something going on. I'm looking over Black Mountain and Castor Mountain, and there's these craft that are coming up, and it's very uniform. There's a lot of them, and they're accompanied by helicopters." And that got our attention. We were like, wow, that's really strange. I really want to see that. So about a week went by, and we met up with her, and she said, forgive me, but I have guests. I have people on a tour. Do you mind being with one of my tours? I said, no, it's fine. I hope your guests don't mind us being there. She said, no, they're completely cool with it. They're fine. She said, so I'm going to go to a different site when you meet with me tonight. So we met up with her, and she goes down Bill Gray Road, and that's when we were given the night vision by her. And Alexandra was the first to get the night vision on, and she gestures over Black Mountain, and she goes, just look over the left shoulder of Black Mountain. Over Black Mountain is the Sycamore Canyon and Sycamore Basin. So we're looking over there, and Alexandra starts counting helicopters, and she counts 17 Black Hawk helicopters, and they're just hovering, and they're all at the same altitude, and they appear to be spaced evenly across the horizon, like they're waiting for something. Within, I think, 10 minutes, the first orange globe or orange ball of light rises up from the basin over top of Black Mountain. It gets really bright to a point where we've got the night vision on. We had to take the night vision away from our eyes because it was blinding at that point. And we're seeing it start to coast off to the southwest toward Woodchute Mountain. And it's followed by 2 Black Hawk helicopters. Once it's over the mountain, we again can put our night vision up, and the same thing occurs. Another orange globe comes up from behind Black Mountain, and 2 more helicopters break off and follow it over Wood Chute Mountain. This has been the pattern for over a year now. So that's been happening every night since September 27th. So whatever they're doing, Sam, they're so confident in what they're doing, they don't care that people are seeing it. And that's one of the things that's kind of frightening to some of the other investigators. I think it's frightening too. They're so bold and they're so well financed and they are so confident in the veil of secrecy that's being given to them due to their security status, for one thing. So, General Eisenhower warned, I should say General Eisenhower, President
military-industrial complex.
Yes. And you could see his expression change in that 1961 footage. He's very, very serious. He has a very serious message for the American public to pay attention to. I think it kind of went over a lot of people's heads. They're like, oh, what's he talking about? Of course we just got through World War II because of him, and we won because of him. So
and people had this image of the military-industrial complex. It's like, it's Martin Marietta. They made the bombers that brought our boys home safe, and like it was like something to celebrate without like kind of looking deeper into the underbelly of what was actually happening. Is that military-industrial complex like congealed and solidified itself underneath everything else that we know?
Sure did. And I think probably where maybe even Eisenhower, well, he probably did foresee this. He was a very wise man, but Field Marshal Montgomery once said of Eisenhower that he didn't think he was really so much a military man; he was more of a diplomat. But he said that's where the Americans were brilliant by putting a diplomat in the position of Supreme Allied Commander, because when all the different allies were not getting along, there was one man who always managed to say, "Come on, team, let's pull together," and that was Ike. Ike was really good at passing messages along that everybody could resonate with and keep everyone focused on beating arguably the most deadly and dangerous people of the last century, possibly the last couple of centuries, which was the Third Reich. The German military was a juggernaut, and we could have lost that war. If we didn't have a good coordinated effort between all the allies, we might have been beaten by the German war machine, because they were really good at what they did. And as it was, American military production, the military-industrial complex as it was able to outproduce the capabilities. And so was the Soviets did too. They were cranking out their T-34 tanks. We were cranking out our M4 Shermans at a rate that they just couldn't match. So you've probably heard, or the other history geeks like myself will be like, well, it took 5 Shermans to knock out 1 Tiger. And that is true. So we were able to outproduce through numbers what we couldn't do in quality. And that's not to say that we didn't turn out quality things, because our Jeeps were very high quality vehicles. The Germans loved our Jeeps. The German veterans I've interviewed loved our Jeeps. And
small arms.
Small arms were fantastic. We made a lot of really good equipment. It just happens that in typical German fashion, they over-engineered. They still do. They over-engineer their cars. And so we were able to do that. We were able to overwhelm them with production, and the Soviets did as well. And I can't take credit from our fighting men. The 10% of men that picked up the rifle in the American Army at that time and faced the Germans they're heroes, and they always will be. They're the great generation that our hats will always be doffed to them. But when you look at the military-industrial complex and its progression, its existence from especially the Second World War, there's one point or one place where it changed, and I think that's Alamogordo in New Mexico. Once we tested the first nuclear bomb, not only did NHI take notice of humankind, particularly the American war might in the United States. It seems like that's consistent when everyone agrees that NHI really started to show up was after Alamogordo in the Trinity
after
test.
Trinity, yeah.
Yes, it seems like that's a time that not only changed the lives of the people living in the United States, but the entire world. NHI starts showing up more frequently. And there's a great interest in our nuclear production, and then later our nuclear power facilities.
Have you seen the video? I hadn't seen it until fairly recently. It's the Starfish Triple Prime test, where they were detonating airburst weapons, and there's actually what they allege is a craft that drops out of the fireball, like it had been monitoring. The narrative is that it had been monitoring, and it got caught in the blast. And there's definitely something that drops out. I don't know. It made a lot of sense to me. If I was them, I would want to keep my finger right on that pulse.
Yes, I agree. There's a lot of evidence too. Now that you mention it, starting to come out. I think they'll probably see in future months. Now that they're promising much more disclosure, we'll see what happens. But I think we'll probably see a lot more stock footage from those tests in those days, showing anomalous activity in the sky before and after a lot of the nuclear tests that we did. Because we did so many. When you look at some of these maps of how many nuclear detonations we had an insane number of nuclear detonations above ground, in the air, in the
Ocean.
Pacific, and in the ocean. Yes, we were over testing our nuclear capabilities. First, to make sure that they were having the kill ratio that they wanted, and then second,
Send a message.
Yes, send that message out to all of our enemies. We've got these. We've got many of them. So don't mess with us. And so the new United States that was born of World War II was a privatized military industry, which is what Ike again was warning us about. That suddenly you have, I guess the best way to put it in lay terms, and I'm not the best orator, or certainly not the best with vocabulary, but you suddenly have now civilian companies who are given incredible security clearance, equal to that of people in the inner circle of the Pentagon.
But not subject to the same responsibilities or consequences for misusing those clearances.
You said it all right there. So you that particular statement is the real danger zone of the military-industrial complex, especially as it stands here in the desert outside of Sedona, because these people wield an unprecedented amount of power. And the other investigators who are working on this are constantly warning each other, be very careful. These people are absolutely ruthless. And one simple investigator out there poking around the desert is nothing to them. They're going to be quick if you get your nose in the wrong place, the wrong time, to disappear you, as they put it. And so we no longer go over the fences. After we were shot at, we stopped going over fences and going into those areas, and we watched them from a distance. And I know they're there, and that's good enough for me. And I don't have any intention of going over those fences ever again. But there's other people who have had numerous encounters, and there'll be many more to come, I'm sure, before much of this is brought into the light. But the military-industrial complex, as it stands, you've got these companies like Lockheed Martin. And one of the things that they were doing here was like, okay, you've established that Martin Marietta is here, that Martin Marietta owns several cement factories and rock quarries and so on. But does that necessarily mean that Lockheed Martin is there? And one of the other investigators came back and said, it sure does. Look at this. And they had a document that said that even where Lockheed Martin doesn't have their name down, they own 80% of the shares in all the other locations of Martin Marietta. So with that said, if you see a location that's Martin Marietta, the chances are that very high that Lockheed Martin is not too far away or that far underground from a site that Martin Marietta is operating.
And there are, I know that you've thought of this. I don't know. I've heard it other places, but the idea of having a cement plant that close to a potential base makes so much sense to me. Not just because you need, huge quantities of concrete to craft whatever it is that you're crafting, but also it's a phenomenal way to get rid of any spoils that you can't dispose of in other ways, because you can have infinite trucks in and out of those gates, and no one's going to look twice at a truck full of rubble, like leaving a gravel plant.
We had so many people that reached out to us to comment on that. There was one lady, she's an elderly lady that was working at one of the local airports. I think it was the airport in Prescott, I believe. And so she lived on the road that goes into the cement plant, and she was being awoke. She was a light sleeper by these convoys of trucks going into the cement plant down there near Clarkdale. And she told us that this was a nightly occurrence. And she said when she would look out the window, she was seeing flatbed trucks with large chains and straps over what she described were 50-foot sections of prefabricated tunnel. And that caught my ear because, again, in reference to the Terra company that came in for Beyond Skinwalker, what they located was a 50-foot diameter man-made tunnel. And so with prefabricated sections of concrete tunnel, that makes sense as to why these tunnel sections are being taken into the factory. But she was so curious, because it's happening so often, that her and her husband went for a walk one day. I said, well, if they're taking them inside, naturally they'll be stacked up outside somewhere. We'll see them. And so they were walking in the hills. There's a mountain on the southwest side of the factory. You can look right down into the factory, and you can't miss the entire property. Well, they couldn't see them. They couldn't see any of these prefabricated sections. And the trucks would go in, by the way, and she wouldn't see them coming back out. So she said, where are the trucks going? Where the prefabricated 50-foot sections going? They're going in, but they're not coming out. Well, they must be going underground. When I was talking to John Bradshaw, the son of Bob Bradshaw of the Bradshaw Ranch, he was telling me one day, he's very careful about how he words things naturally, I think because of his past with the facility out there and run-ins with those people. He said, Jeremiah, he said, the factory down there, when it was bought out, he said it was the biggest employer in the area, and everybody wanted a job down there, good benefits, a good company. He said, but he said they had armed guards with machine guns at the front gate. And he said that struck a lot of locals as being very strange, but everybody basically just shrugged it off because, again, it's good jobs in the middle of nowhere in a rural area where people desperately need jobs. He said they're no longer there. He said the guards weren't there for that many years, but they must have realized that was too high profile, so the guards ended up disappearing. They still have armed security there, but not with a show of force looking like soldiers. They're more like typical security you'd expect to see with a little cubicle with an arm drop across the road. He said one thing that really struck him and a lot of other locals who had the good mind to pay attention was, for years, they had a deal with the dam being built on the Arizona-Nevada border to take the spoils from down there to make concrete out of it and drive it up to the dam. So he said every day, right through the center of on 89A, were these large trucks, and you'd see the spoils piled up in the back of these trucks. He said every 5 minutes, you could mark your watch by it. Every 5 minutes, a full truck went through town in the working hours of the day, 8 hours a day. He said that went on for years. He said, so do the math. How much spoil do you think that is? And I remember shrugging. I said, I don't know, John. I'm not sure what you're driving at. He said, well, think about it, Jeremiah. He said, you're talking about something underground down there. He said, you've seen the quarry right outside the factory, have you not? I said, sure. We've been up on the mountain looking right down the quarry, yeah. He goes, does it look very deep? I said, no, because it looked like it's been bigger in the time that you lived here. I said, no, it's the same size. And they nodded. He smiled. He goes, so where do you think all that material is coming from? And I slapped my hand saying, okay, I gotcha. It's coming from underground. And he nodded. He wouldn't affirm. He simply nodded with a little bit of affirmation in the physical by nodding, but he didn't say, yes, you've got it right. So that from someone like him in particular, who felt he was there on his dad's ranch. He felt the ranch tremble at night and shake, and he heard the water pipes rattling and the windows rattling. Saw the farm animals being scared away. They knew there was something going on underground. His dad was asked at one point, why would you be leaving your home? Why would you sell your home? You've got a legacy here. You could pass on to your sons. They could easily pick up the ranch and do the horse tours and make money renting out the film set to Hollywood productions. And he said, well, I've gotten pretty tired of my house shaking at night, my windows rattling, my water pipes rattling, and my animals being scared away. And I saw this interview. It's been taken off the internet. But he looks to the side, and I presume his wife, Linda, is probably on the side telling him to knock it off because, of course, they signed NDAs that time. He looks down and he goes, that's all I have to say about that. And so the news reporter turns and goes, well, there you have it from Sedona, Arizona. Legacy comes to an end. And so, again, they knew what was going on. And a neighbor of his, right after that broadcast, came up and said, Bob, what's going on? What's with this? What's with your place shaking? And Bob turned to him with a very sincere face. He was a typical old cowboy, very gruff, polite. He was very gentlemanly, but he was not one to exaggerate anything. He turned to that neighbor and he said, well, they're expanding that base from Secret Mountain under my property. And he looked at them straight, and that was the end of his sentence. And the other person was like, holy crap, he's serious. And so they just left it at that because they realized it was also something he was squirming and uncomfortable to talk about, naturally, for the circumstances of losing the ranch. And they weren't the only ranch that was lost. There's 5 ranches altogether, including the Bradshaw Ranch, more or less around the same time, that were confiscated by the federal government through different means. And I remember reading an account from a government man who said when they needed to seize property, he said it was the easiest thing. He said, especially if it was in a relatively rural area like the Southwest, he said they would simply manufacture Indian ruins or manufacture Indian burial grounds. He said, boom, we had it. We would fence off the property, declare it the Roosevelt Act of 1906, its antiquity. It has to be protected. They said no one was all the wiser. People would then leave it alone, and we had property that was secured, fenced off, and we could monitor it any which way we had to, or utilize for whatever we had to utilize, including the portal sites that are in the Sedona area. And that was probably the most. If someone had come up to me right around the time we started investigating, Sam, 13 years ago, and said, "Well, my gosh, years from now you're going to find portals," I would have laughed at them. I would have thought that's just ridiculous. Portal sites. It's something out of the 80s sci-fi movies that I grew up on, a portal or a Stargate and so on. And now I'm not laughing because they do exist. The Department of Defense had located many of them, but they deemed that there were 9 around the world that were extremely active, and that NHI was coming and going through them, sometimes walking through them, sometimes crawling through them, sometimes flying through it, and sometimes in advanced technology. And so naturally, they want to locate these 9 sites. They located one, only one, in North America, and that one is what they described in a canyon outside of Sedona, Arizona. And I think I told you when we were in the first podcast, it was a more recent piece of evidence that hit us in December of this last year, where Linda Moulton Howell had a Martin Marietta engineer who she met, who had constructed a state-of-the-art facility for training astronauts in Florida. And he contacted her wanting to tell her about something. It was that project where the Department of Defense had located a portal, and they wanted top engineers to go and monitor it and see what qualities it gave off naturally that they might be able to control, in the idea that they might be able to stop anything from coming and going through it, because it's a security threat. It's a major national security. It's kind of a Trojan horse, I guess you'd look at it in those days, that if there's very advanced technology with extremely advanced NHI coming through with it, naturally they have to look at it. Even if it's not hostile, they have to address it as a hostile threat. And to do so, they can't catch the craft that's coming through it. At the time, they probably couldn't shoot it down because it would disable their jet fighters or the instrument panels on the jets. So the only thing they can do is try to alter or control the geophysical properties around it. And that's where the Martin Marietta engineer confirmed this by saying there is a portal outside of Southern Arizona. They sent us there to monitor it for some time, and we could see things coming and going from it. The only thing that they were able to deduce from it was that the concave electromagnetic aura of the planet, whenever the portal would open, would collapse in on itself. And then whenever the NHI was done using it, it would pop back into place. And they realized that is something that they can control electrically. And so they made a device, which they did a sketch of, or the one whistleblower made a sketch of for Linda Moulton Howell. And then they constructed a brick windowless shack, as he described it, to house this device. And it's still there to this day. And they use that to control this portal site. And I think most of the people that are listening to this, and you may have seen the Jake Barber interview.
Yeah. Yep.
News Nation, and what he was doing, working up for a private company, was recovery. So they would go with their helicopters and they would recover down an NHI craft, strap it up, and then transport it to the aerospace engineering company, the firm that they were working for. And that was solely their job.
And then leave it and then disappear.
So that it could be reverse engineered. I think what makes the Sedona facility also bigger and more of a priority and more active is this natural portal site, which they've got not 1, not 2, but 4 fences around. I think, and this is conjecture, and forgive me if I'm repeating myself again from the earlier podcast, but I think that the actual meat and potatoes of what's going on with the aerospace and engineering firms outside Sedona is that the portal site gives them an on-location site where when they shut this device off at will, whenever they want to, they can meet the quota, which is supposedly across the country, especially in the Southwest. These firms have 2 times, sometimes 3 times a year, to down an ET craft, take the biologicals out, send them to quarantine, and the biological goes to the closest lab. Then the technology also goes through quarantine and then goes to the nearest aerospace engineering firm, where they in turn will do reverse engineering and look at the components and see how they work. I think what they've got here in outside the Sedona area is a pristine, almost perfect operation, and that the portal site gives them the spider trapdoor, if you will, the trap where they can send recovery teams and these specialists behind an already cordoned off area. The road to this site that we call Purple Haze does actually close sometimes twice a year. And they always give the same reason: hazardous road conditions. That road is flat. There's no dry wash. There's no water runoff. There's no culvert. There's nothing there that could be deemed hazardous road conditions. Yet in our research, our first person accounts, we've seen this road blocked off with 2 roadblocks. They're very serious about blocking off this road. And I think what they do is they block off the road and they open up the port. They shut off the device. They let the portal site open, and whatever comes through, be it biological or technology with biologicals, they disable it before it can get really up high in the air. And then they've got the specialist teams there that are trained to handle whatever is on site. So if it's the biologicals, they have a recovery team and all the equipment to recover the biological. And then the entrance to the underground facilities right there. So they swoop it underground, and the same with whatever tech, given if it's small enough to take underground or through one of the ramps that goes into the mountain there, it goes off to a special quarantine, and then in turn goes into the immediately into the firm underground. It's an almost perfect operation because they've completely gotten rid of the old variables. Like with the Roswell crash, they had to load those 2 craft up and drive them in American deuce-and-a-half trucks all the way across country to Rice-Patterson. And of course, numerous people saw them, including Philip Corso.
Well, and the biggest problem with that whole operation is it was military. Like I mean, they don't have the restrictions as private aerospace and, aeronautical companies. They can do what they want. They can keep it secret. There's no rules about disclosing. This is our proprietary technology. Like, this is business secrets.
Exactly. And that's where I think Colonel Corso, when he had come back from the Second World War, was lucky not to be, they cashiered so much of the officers' cadre because we had, I think, over 2 million armed servicemen in the ETO alone. Suddenly the war is over. They don't need an army that big. So they cashier most of the officers' corps. They of course downsized the army. And suddenly we have a massive military industrial complex with no conflict to feed. And it's hungry for conflict. It's hungry for more money to do what it does. And the only thing that's really being fed money is the nuclear industry, which, the nuclear arms race is just about to kick off. The Cold War is kicking off in the 1950s. We get our proxy war, if you will, in the early 1950s in Korea. And that starts the whole thing off. But I think that this new arms race, I now know, this new arms race is not obviously the nuclear capabilities. It's now off-world tech. And naturally, you see how quickly our technology has advanced from, let's go back to the early part of the century when something as grand as the Titanic is in the sea. There's never been a vehicle that big. And it's got electricity. It's got the Marconi wireless. It's got all this incredible cutting edge technology. Look at how far we've come from the time the Titanic set sail to now, where you've got a cell phone that at a whim you can call anybody anywhere. They can see you on it. It's actually better than a Star Trek communicator. You can look up anything on the internet on a cell phone. It's come so far.
Gamma cameras.
Human beings are capable, and the cameras. Yes, it's a good point. And if human beings can come that far, think of how quickly the NHI that comes through these portal sites, they come through, let's say 8 months ago, and somebody's able to down whatever craft comes through it. Naturally, a year later, when they come through with something, it's probably even more far advanced. And I think that's why the disclosure is not coming the way people would hope it would be, because the aerospace and engineering firms actually hold the complete, what's the way to put it, priority over top of the NHI and over top of the biologicals and their technology, which is advancing so quickly. It's a catch-22. It's an arms race that won't stop, because now they're all vying with each other. You've got Lockheed Martin over here, and let's say Raytheon over here, Northrop Grumman, and they're all working for each other to have the fastest, bestest, newest of NHI craft that they can reverse engineer. And I think that's why this site in particular in Sedona is so active. And you see this advanced test craft on the move literally every night, because they've probably been more successful than some of the other sites because they've got this natural portal site here, and all they have to do is switch their device off. Something comes through, they disable it, and suddenly they've got the newest, bestest, fastest thing. Months later, they decide.
You have an NHI vending machine.
That's it. That's a good way of putting it. I really think so. Again, this is, it's conjecture on my part, but if I was to try to set myself in their shoes and think about, what is my function? How do I benefit and profit from this particular industry? And what gives me advantage over the other aerospace and engineering firms? And accordingly, some of these guys that have come out, like Jake Barber, they admit that in some circumstances, when they go to recover a downed craft, that they're ambushed by other human beings at the crash site because other contractors from another firm have come there to take it from them. So there's now an arms race, not just with other countries, but within the aerospace engineering firms themselves within our own country. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest buffers that's covering and keeping disclosure from happening, is because you go to any one of our branches, executive, legislative, judicial, and you ask them, what is this? Why are you not giving us disclosure? They're usually being honest and saying, we don't know. We're of any, and I believe they're honest. I believe only a select few know. If anybody knows, the paymasters in the Pentagon certainly know, because they're controlling where the black budget funding goes. So if it was up to me and I was handling disclosure, I would go to the committee, Anna Paulina Luna and Eric Burleson and so on. I'd say, I am grateful, first of all, for what you're all doing. My hat's off to you. But you have to go to the horse's mouth. Follow the money. It's taxpayer money. We're all paying for it. And it goes into the Pentagon and it disappears. Go in there and shake down the paymasters. Get subpoena power. Subpoena those guys. And also, if possible, get the judicial or legislative power to threaten the revoking of their security status.
You grab that financial windpipe and just start to listen to who chokes. Absolutely. That's my philosophy, because the disclosure is not as easy, I think, especially now from our investigation over the past years, specifically this last year. Disclosure is it's something everybody wants, of course. Everybody's a sucker for the truth, even if the truth hurts. And some of the truth of disclosure is going to sting a lot, especially to the American public, because we've been lied to for so long. And we're told this is a government for the people, by the people. In elementary school, we stand with pride to take the Pledge of Allegiance every day. We've got a really good thing going in Thomas Jefferson's ideals of what this country should be. But what it's become, because this type of government can be easily corrupted, particularly by economics. And economics is where the military-industrial complex comes in, because they are our bread and butter of our war-making capabilities. And it was John Kennedy, I think, that was saying that the fruits of any nation are attained by their war-making capabilities. So here you've got the military-industrial complex, which includes massive companies like Raytheon. Raytheon just got a massive contract here in Arizona. I think it's in Tucson for, if I could be misquoting this, but they just got it within weeks ago, where it's something like 1.6 billion. I forget what. It's an incredible sum of money for a new rocket program and missiles. So they're here in force all over the Southwest, and some of what they're doing is in plain sight, and it's like an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is what they're doing in plain sight. It makes the news, but the majority of their industry is literally underground, subsurface, and that's where the real juicy money-making part of what they're doing comes from. So when you come back to the Sedona subject, in the places like the Bradshaw Ranch that is so full of this anomalous activity, again, you go back to the portals. And Tom Dongo had deduced back in the 1990s, he said, I think there's hundreds of portals in the canyon areas. But because of the geophysical qualities of the areas, some of them they'll open just once and then close, and they don't open the same place again. Some of them move or drift. And I think he's right, because the electrical engineer who's been investigating this area for almost as long as I've been alive, he's been working on it since the 70s. He was measuring the amount of the piezoelectricity that was coming out of the ground. Now, I'm a lay person, so having me explain it would be better if he does. But in short, because there is a lot of groundwater in northern Arizona coming down from the Flagstaff area, especially during snow melt or after a monsoon, the groundwater comes through and it's cold, and it naturally creates friction up against the iron-rich rock in the ground here in Sedona, and the quartz crystal, which is in the rock here. In some places, you can see it above ground. It's like people throw buckets of it. In fact, on the east hill or the east ridge near Bradshaw Ranch,
There's chunks of it all over. Like somebody took buckets of crystal and just threw it all over the place. He believes, and I'm inclined to believe him from the scientific perspective, that much of the anomalous activity in the area is due to the geophysical properties, such as the iron and the piezoelectricity and the quartz crystals that help to magnify that. And the electrons that come up out of the ground, he says, come up in clouds called alions. The alions carry positive and negative electrons, and those in turn have positive and negative ions on top of those. He said they drift toward each other. It's a natural current, and when they collide, that's when the magic happens. So just like the collider in CERN, it happens naturally here and creates the physical qualities needed to make that tear in our reality. And I believe Tom was right when he said we just ended up calling, I think it was Linda's son, Victor, who said, Mom, we live in Galactic Park. And she said, Victor, what did you say? He said, we live in Galactic Park because it's like Grand Central Station for everything paranormal. It all comes through the ranch. And it's due to these portals, likely, and the creatures that use them to come into our world and then to exit our world as well. So I think that is one of the main draws to something like the military-industrial complex, when you have something of great power, such as NHI craft, that can come through not just anywhere randomly in our atmosphere, but they're coming through one point. You've got the perfect, what would you call it? I guess in military terminology, pinch point.
Confluence of things that lead them there.
Yes. I think that's what makes that property down there that we call so valuable.
Jeremiah, I did not see what time it was. I apologize for keeping you this long, but we gotta go. I cannot tell you how much I've enjoyed this.
It was my pleasure, actually. My pleasure. And I'd be happy to talk to you all again whenever we can.
I would love that. And also, the invitation's on the table for Montana. We'd love to host you guys if you were ever up this way. And let's see. Yeah, I thought I had something else. I didn't, but it's really just been a genuine pleasure. And I hope it's okay if I keep in touch with you. Please do. And we'll probably take you up on that invite to Montana. I've never been and definitely want to see that state. I love it. And give my regards to Alexandra. I will. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. See you, Jeremiah. You too. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to an Audio Wool original, produced by Byron McKoy. Theme music is provided by Yawns. For more programs like this, visit audiowool.co.